Welcome back to another episode of Impossible Equals Impossible. I know we took a couple week hiatus. This live show has been an incredible legacy project for me going on 10 months, and it was really created to inspire others to chase their potential instead of accepting their reality. And speaking of impossible equals impossible, I've also been on this new, I guess, challenge, or I don't know what you would call it, but this quest of doing an LinkedIn audio event daily for the entire year, because it's a leap year, 366 days. And that was has been like a huge focus along with this. And it reminds me how important it is to not only build relationships with people, but provide value, right? And we have another incredible guest tonight. Oh my goodness. She is known by many. Well, her name is Theresa, or Professor Theresa Agostinelli, but a lot of people call her Prof T. And she has an incredible story. I remember I met her actually through a LinkedIn audio event, and I got to learn about this incredible journey that she's been on, from losing pretty much everything, being a widow, a single mom, all these things. And now she's a serial entrepreneur and a keynote speaker. So let's get into it. Professor Theresa Agostinelli is the founder of Profit with Purpose, a leading empowerment brand that teaches actionable steps to thrive as a leader and helps you build businesses that promote excellence. She's an author, dynamic speaker, thought leader, human potential specialist, and certified leadership coach who can help you maximize your emotional intelligence and well being. She wrote a book called The Grid System, which speaks about overcoming obstacles, leveraging your gifts, and creating a path to success. And with no further ado, I'm so grateful to have Theresa Agostinelli, or as a lot of us know her as Prof T. Let's see, hopefully this works. Prof T, thank you so much for being here with us today. How are you? Happy Wednesday.
Hey, happy Wednesday, everybody. This is amazing. I'm so excited to be here. I couldn't wait to get on this call with you. How you doing?
I'm so grateful. I'm happy to be here with you. I know that you have such an incredible story, and I want to thank you so much for your time, for being here. So, I guess where we're going to kind of begin with this is, tell us a little bit about who is Prof T, and how did you kind of get to this? You've been on this incredible journey, right, of having to reinvent yourself, overcome all these obstacles, to now being a serial entrepreneur and keynote speaker. But it didn't always start that way. Tell us a little bit about who is Prof T.
Sure, I would be happy to do that. I grew up in a very traumatic household. There was and a lot of people grew up in a very traumatic household. We've all been traumatized by the pandemic. The whole world was traumatized. But I had a very tumultuous childhood and always took to books, always went inside myself. I found my peace in books and music and poetry. So I was always going inward. That was how I learned to cope. But I was also a very anxious little girl. And fast forward, when I was 19, I found myself pregnant. I got married right away. I had my son. And when I was 26 years old, my husband died suddenly. And I was left a single mom and a widow overnight. I had no job, few skills. I was very, very anxious and very unprepared, first of all, to be a mother, and secondly, to be a single mother and a widow. And I began really self sabotaging, self medicating. I began to really live a very anxious and depressed life. And, you know, I wanted to curl up in a ball and die, and I don't think people would have blamed me, but I wanted to be the best mother to my son. I wanted to be the best person that I could be. I wanted to be my best self. I just didn't know how. And so many other things had happened in between that, but I kept having this inner struggle as to why am I self sabotaging? Why is this trauma overtaking my life? And what I found was that trauma alters the brain. Trauma alters the brain. But the good news is you can change your brain. So I made it my obsession to want to find out what was wrong with me. And so I decided to go back to school. I decided to go back into the classroom. Now you have to understand, I hated school to begin with. I was bullied at school. I didn't like school. There was so much trauma at home when I was a kid. I didn't like anybody knowing about anything. Here I find myself in college classrooms with people that were almost half my age. And what I was learning in psychology and neuroscience and sociology, what I was learning was revolutionizing my life. I was finding out why trauma alters the brain and how trauma has a lasting effect. And I just was coming alive. It was resonating. And I wondered, why doesn't everybody know this? Why doesn't everyone teach this? So I made it my passion to want to teach everybody and anybody that I could how to overcome obstacles, how to change your brain, and how to undo the effects of trauma. Now, that's the short version of my journey, but I found myself in time opening my own private practice for helping people with their mental health. I found myself teaching part time at a university here in the Philadelphia area, which I still am part time adjunct professor, teaching psychology, sociology classes, teaching human development. Um, and I found that my my obsession was to make sure that everyone learned how to live their best life, which is culminated in the book The Grid System, culminating with other businesses that I have opened and that my entrepreneurial ship just took off. And now I find myself speaking on stages, talking about not only the book, but how to be great, how to make your teams great, how to live your best life, and how to be great yourself through resilience, but how to help others achieve greatness through learning the skills of resilience.
Yeah, I absolutely. Wow, like I loved everything that you shared, and it's interesting for you how a lot of like your obstacles have kind of been spaced out, right? Because a lot of times for people, well, a lot of people that I interact with, as well as myself, it's kind of like everything seems to hit you at once, usually, and that's kind of interesting that you've really been on this whole gamut of being at different places in life, right? Like you got married when you were 19, you lost your husband when you were 26. Like you've gotten to kind of see not only how these changes have affected you, but also like how you've been at different points in your life, right? How like if that happened maybe when you were younger or whatever, it would have been a different thing. And I love so much that you talk about resilience and this idea that we have the ability to rewire our brain because or our mind per se, right, as some people may think about it. That's been a big part of why I practice the scrolls every day is about mindset, right? And the thing that I found so interesting, I'm curious on your thoughts on this. When I had this really interesting interactions when I got back from my trip to Jacksonville in the beginning of 2024. I started having conversations with a lot of my clients, and I started noticing that less and less and less it became about LinkedIn, and it was really a lot about mindset and performance, right? And you had talked about that from in the beginning about how you work with a lot of teams and as a professor, right? Like teaching people how to really become great. I'm curious for you, like, have you found that so many people don't realize how mindset and performance is really tied into, I don't know if I would, it definitely is along anything professionally, but would you even tie that into just like anything that you want to be great at in life as well? Like those two things are so critical.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And what I found, what neuroscience has proven, that your brain wires itself and then it fires. It wires and fires, it wires and refires based on what you put into it. Because what I found was that by the time you're 2 or 3 years old, you have downloaded what I call mental DNA. And for people who have had significant trauma, those traumatic experiences get locked into the subconscious and it becomes your blueprint for how you live your life. It takes you well into your adult years and it becomes the way you formulate decisions based on finances, relationships, your career, your political views, your spiritual views. And what we found was that you can change that, but it takes a lot of work, it takes practice. So, to answer your question, you have a choice every day when you wake up. You can stay in your bed and pull the covers over your head, and you can also make the choice of one more day. I'm going to get out of this bed and I'm going to fight the good fight and I'm going to override that negative feeling or that negative thought pattern. I'm going to override it. And you make the decision. It's a conscious effort. And that's what I learned, Paul. My mentors, my counselors, my coaches, my advisors. It took a lot of work to change the brain, to change the mindset. And I'm a big believer in making conscious decisions to choose a better way. So you can choose to stay in bed if you want, which Lord knows I had many of those days that I chose to stay in bed, couldn't get out of bed, didn't want to get out of bed, wouldn't get out of bed. Do I still fight that feeling? Absolutely. But now I have the tools and now I have the coping skills needed to override those feelings and make a better decision. And I find that those are my most productive days. Those are people's most productive days. I've had my clients tell me those were their most productive days because they made the conscious decision, because they learned those coping skills. So it is a choice, and it is a daily choice that we have to make.
Yeah, absolutely love that. That was probably one of my biggest takeaways from the second half of 2023 was that I remember sitting down with myself one day and like having an honest conversation. Like pain, pain is inevitable, but suffering is like really a choice, right? Like you are choosing to do nothing in this moment. Like you have options. And one of the biggest takeaways for me is this idea that inaction is a choice, right? Like it really is. And I love everything that you shared. You you and I were kind of talking in the pre-live about personal development and mentorship being really instrumental parts of our life. And I'm really curious for you. I always love asking this question because it tells me so much, not only about you, but I found that every other person that I've asked this question to, you learn so much about why people are the way that they are. Who has been the most impactful person in your life, and what was the most valuable lesson that they've taught you?
Oh, that's such a great question, and there's many. But I'm going to go back to my parents. My parents were married for many, many, many years. They have weathered a lot of storms. The reason I wrote the book was because of my parents. Even though I grew up in a very traumatic, dysfunctional household, my parents were still my parents. And I learned from both of them, and we can talk about that in a little bit, but I learned from them how to be resilient. My dad used to say all the time, a hero dies one death, a coward dies 1,000 deaths. And I never forgot that, because we go through things, we go through stuff, right? But when you look at it with a mindset of, I can get through this, I'm strong, I can do this, rather than becoming a victim and, in a sense, dying death after death after death, you become the victor, and you take that one hit and you use it to make you strong. So that's one thing that I learned from my parents, is to keep going no matter what. And I would also say, of course, I'm a John Maxwell coach. Learned a lot through John Maxwell, through a lot of the coaches in that, um, in the John Maxwell team. So I would definitely say another one who's been very impactful. There's just so many. We don't do this alone. But I'm just going to say that my parents were the ones that instilled in me, the mindset of, get up and try it again. Just get up and do it again.
Wow, that was so powerful. It's interesting because I think you might be the only person that I've had on this show that answered it as their parents. A lot of times, like, what I find with a lot of people that have been previous guests on this show, a lot of us kind of turn to personal development and mentorship because it was a lack of what we kind of got from our parents, right? So it's kind of like, well, this person has kind of been doing this, and I think for me more than any of my other guests, just because I'm still in my 20s, but I really do look at a lot of these people as like, in many ways, kind of like parents, mentors, however you want to call it. And looking back, right, I don't have any regrets about, like, my mom or my dad or any of those things, but I'm always blown away when when people say that. And I think that what it really details as well is sometimes people overcomplicate things, right? Like they think that, oh, I need to have this massive celebrity and they need to teach me this profound thing, when it could really be like the smallest thing that changes your perspective, right? Like I'll never forget the card that my aunt sent me when I was 18 and I was like done, which is ironically why I created this show on my birthday, my 26th birthday last year, was my aunt said, like, from the day that you were born, I knew that you would change the world. And it was that small thing that has completely changed the trajectory of my life. So I love everything that you shared. Where I want to go next, this is so interesting. I was actually just thinking about this as I was looking at it, right? A lot of people call you Prof T. And when I look at the word profit, if you remove the I, it's, Prof T. Tell us a little bit more about this idea of profit with purpose. Like, how did that really come about? I find it so interesting that you talk about profit with purpose, because so many times I think people think that it's one or the other, right? Like, I can't make a bunch of money, but then also live this extraordinary, purposeful life where I get to give back. And I know for you, that's like a huge part of a lot of the work that you do. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you for that. So, profit with purpose came about because, look, for years I tried to make sense out of the pain that I had in my heart. Many people who are grieving or suffering try to make sense of the pain. And what I found in my own life was that I wanted the pain to propel me into my purpose. And I was my first customer. when I was going through my transformational journey, I was my first customer. I tested and tried these concepts on myself first. And I found that my pain was propelling me into my purpose, right? And when you allow your pain or your suffering to propel you into your purpose, that's where you find your passion. And a lot of people have a passion, have a purpose, but they're not profiting from it. So that's called a hobby. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because what I realized was you can do what you love. How many people listening here in the audience, or how many people, Paul, do you know that are in a job they hate? They're miserable, right?
Too many.
So many that I've found over the years. And when you work with someone and you find their passion and you allow their passion to propel them into their purpose, you find that they are profiting because they're doing what they love to do and getting paid for it. There is a stigma that we seem to have in our culture that you should not be paid for doing something you love, something you're good at. Okay. It is my it is my opinion that we can be doing what we love to do and get paid for it. We should be. God has given us all gifts to better serve humanity. Now, on the next step of that is profit means different things to different people. When you are operating in your purpose, when you are operating in your passion, you are profiting. You're profiting mentally, physically, financially, emotionally, spiritually. You're profiting in all of those areas because you're living in your purpose. You're serving humanity in your purpose. And when you serve humanity in your purpose, you will find that you will profit in so many other ways. So it's all about profiting with a purpose, having a reason to get up and go to work, having a reason to get up and go do what you love to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I love everything that you shared, and I was clapping because I see so many people that feel the same way. I mean, you and I have even had this like conversation like one on one where it's like you're like, I've been giving away so much stuff for so long, right? Like I deserve to get paid. And I think that this whole money conversation has been such an interesting thing. I remember when I was in finance, I've made people millions of dollars in my career, and I've made money or whatever. And I remember every time that I would go into my interactions with my clients when I was in finance, I would always they would look at me and they'd be like, "Man, it's like you've you've made us like all this money, right? Like, how do we help you?" And I was like, "I already every time that I help somebody else, like I win the trade because for them, their currency and what they're looking at is money. Whereas for me, my currency for life now is time and impact, right? Like changing somebody's life is completely priceless. And with a lot of the work that I used to do, it wasn't just one person, it was generational because you do it for the parents, you do it for the kids, and so forth. And all these type of things. It's really interesting, and I want to give a shout out to some people in the audience. I know in my
Yeah.
audio events I call them in the Garden of Excellence, but Gabe, so good to see you, my friend. He was really excited for this conversation, Prof T. So if you haven't, you definitely have to connect with him. He does a whole bunch of live streaming, and he's they I don't know if he still brands himself this way, but he was known as the king of LinkedIn Live. That was his thing. I've spoken on his show before, and he says, "I have been in the situation where I was in a job that I so despised, so I'm familiar." Yeah, and you know what's interesting, right? Like we're on LinkedIn. I This was one of my recent posts that I had about how I really do look at networking in a sense as the form of freedom, because when you have conversations with people, when you can become an asset to pretty much everybody that you meet, right, and you provide value, it means that you no longer have to stay in situations like earlier. Prof T and I were talking about personal development and mentors, and one of the things that I'll always remember from the conversation that I've had with a lot of mentors is they say, like, you know, I was in a situation where I put up with this for so long because I didn't have any options. And I think that's really how networking needs to be kind of reframed, or I would suggest for people to look at is look at it in the sense of options, right? Like it is giving you options, and there's nothing wrong with wanting more out of life. Prof T, you and I were talking about gratitude, and the interesting thing to me is that I've seen so many people try to weaponize gratitude like it's a bad thing. And I was like, there is nothing wrong with saying I'm so grateful for everything that I have, but I know that I'm capable of so much more, right? And I think that we live in this society where it's like this or this, when it really can be both. Like how you said, right? You can make money and do that thing that you've always wanted to do, and it it really is a powerful share. What I'm kind of curious for you, Prof T, because you're not really like completely an entrepreneur, right? Because you do work for like university part time, right? And you teach and you do a lot of these things. I'm curious for you because for me, I love the freedom aspect. Like I was telling somebody, I was like, I don't even know if there's an amount of money that you can pay me to give up, owning my time and getting to choose who I work with and all these things. Why is it for you that when you have this incredible speaking career, right? You're an author and you write books and you're a leadership coach and all these things. Why is it for you that you're still really passionate about being a professor and like teaching, right, in colleges, when in many ways the the goal is kind of different, right? Like in colleges, when you're teaching, they teach people generally to go work for somebody else, right? That's what a lot of them do. Whereas for you, you do a lot of like entrepreneurial things. I'm kind of curious for you. Why do you decide to do both?
So that's a really great question. I knew early on that I was never going to be a clock puncher. I knew for me that I was someone who just liked to follow my own path. I think that was part of my coping skills. When you're bullied in school or when you're living in a traumatic household and there's just trauma and drama all around you all the time, you learn to adapt and overcome and just follow the beat of your own drum, as they say. So I knew that I was not going to be someone who would be able to work for people, which I did. I had jobs, didn't like it. I just didn't like to have to be stuck to a clock. Um, Teaching at a university part time is a wonderful thing because I've been there since 2011, but I get to pick the semesters that I want to teach. I get to pick the day and the time that I want to teach the class. I get to pick the semester if I don't want to teach this semester or last semester or next semester. So I get to pick and choose how I want to set my time for that. I love teaching the next generation. They're the next generation. If we're not teaching them how to overcome obstacles and challenges and live through trauma, and how to overcome their own um, tragic life that they've had, we're not going to have a great future. So, I believe the children are the future. There's a song and there's a chapter in my book about leading the next generation. There's also a chapter in my book about gratitude. So we have to teach we have to teach the next generation. And in my teaching, sure, I'm teaching these college students. Some of them are going to be doctors and therapists and teachers, and some of them are going to go into the juvenile justice system, and some of them are going to be nurses. So I'm still teaching them, but I'm also letting them see how you can be an entrepreneur, how you can use your passion to propel you into your purpose and profit, and how you can still be calling your own shots. So I think it's, for me, I still consider myself an entrepreneur. I mean, I've had so many different companies that I've started, and now I'm on, now that I've written a book, an author, it's something else on my list of things that I've always wanted to do. So I think we have to teach the next generation how to be entrepreneurial, because that's the world we live in now. And gone are the days where you have to go to work from 9 to 5. And I knew that I was not going to be a 9 to 5er. Um, and I'm very grateful for that. But I made the conscious decision. And Paul, this is what I want to touch on really quickly. Was it easy? Heck no. It took me a long time. It took me a lot of mistakes. It took me a lot of failures. It took me a lot of trying. It took me a lot of time, energy, finances. So there are some who are happy going to work from 9 to 5. They go home, they watch TV, have a little bit of supper, get ready for bed. They're fine with that. That was not going to be me. That was never going to be me. That was not fulfilling enough for me. So I try to help people understand that it's okay to do that. But if there's something more, if you're looking for something more, then that entrepreneurial spirit must be looked at, and it must be cultivated, and it must be strengthened. So that's what I love to do. I love to help people tap into their entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I want to make something clear. Like, we're not saying that everybody should be an entrepreneur, like, like quit your job and go be an entrepreneur. But it's interesting because the corporate world kind of, I think, showed me that that wasn't my lifestyle. I'm looking at a comment that Gabe made here where he says, it took me it took me a long time to find out what I'm truly passionate about. Now that I have, it's all about growing more in my purpose.
I
And
love that. I
I,
love that.
yeah, I think one of the reasons why it's so hard for a lot of people, just speaking for myself, and if anybody who's listening can relate, self awareness was my biggest takeaway of 2023, and realizing that, being honest with myself, for most of my life, I was probably existing asleep instead of living awake, alive, and intentionally. And sometimes, and Prof T, like, you and I've had this conversation. It was actually kind of how we met, right? Like, we all don't know what we don't know, right? There's gonna be times where you invest in people that don't work out, or you buy things that don't work. But it's like, it's, can you be self-aware to know the questions to ask, or to know, kind of how to distinguish things. Like, that's one of the things for me that I see so much on how people build business online nowadays. It's a lot of trendy things. People are focusing so much on virality instead of sustainability. And when you look at the numbers, that's why most people don't make it out of the first year when they do a new business, because they're focusing so much on this quick success, when I think you and I would both agree, right, that the secret to life or doing anything great is delayed gratification, right? Like, how long can you do something without seeing the results? And I love everything that you shared. I also want to acknowledge, for some reason, and this is kind of one of the things with LinkedIn Live, I'm not seeing a lot of the comments pop up, but I want to acknowledge Stephen and Oliver B. Thank you so much for being here. I love what Oliver said about how, he says, I have to agree, there are rewards when you're completing a task and projects, but when it's aligned with your internal creativity and passions, massive satisfaction. And I love that, Oliver. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then Stephen has something to say about, Stephen, this makes me cringe too, but he says, I agree. I've heard the term toxic positivity and it makes me cringe. I think what the real word should be is toxic inauthenticity. And you know what's really interesting about this conversation of toxic? One, it's one of the words that I don't even like using, so the fact that I have to say it is kind of unfortunate. But I think if we're being honest with ourselves, right, like we all have those tendencies, right? Especially if you're a high performer, you have moments and things that you do that are kind of going to be that way. And the reason why I don't like it is because it's such a negative word, right? And if you're in a space, right, where Prof T was just talking about earlier, like, what if you're in that space of like, oh man, everything's like the house is like burning, metaphorically, and you're gonna use that negativity, like it's not gonna do anything for you. So I I believe in using words that are honest to your feelings, but it doesn't put you down more. So I don't like the word imposter syndrome because it's really about self doubt, right? Like we all are going to experience that. But if you're feeling down, what is calling yourself an imposter going to do versus saying, hey, I have some self doubt about this, and kind of just work through it, right? Go as you go. So, yeah, love the contributions that we've been getting from wonderful friends in the audience. And if you guys haven't, definitely go connect with myself or Prof T. A lot of you are connected to me, but it was great to meet you, Oliver. I don't think we're connected. Prof T, I'm really curious for you because you you've kind of done the whole, they call it like triple threat thing, right? Where it's like you become a speaker, well, you write your book to get speaking opportunities, and then through the speaking opportunities, you sell like some type of course or program or all these type of things. My journey to that has been kind of the complete opposite from what a lot of people do. I think I started speaking and then I created a course and I'm writing my book this year. But I'm kind of curious for you, like, how has your journey been among those three things? And if you had to pick between the three, I think I know what you're going to pick, but which one is your favorite and why?
Thank you. That's a good question. And I also want to thank the folks that are hopping in and sending us messages. I can only see a few, but so I don't know how many people are on or listening. Um, I don't sell courses, Paul. I don't have anything. I don't, to me, that's cumbersome to make courses and try to sell them. I could, I just don't. I think that's something that eventually I'm going to have to tackle. But I love I love teaching. When people call me to come and speak, they say it's motivational speaking. Look, I can't motivate anybody. I can barely motivate myself. So I like to call it teaching. It's leadership teaching. I like to teach people how to be their best self. So when I'm speaking to an audience, I just spoke to um, what we call our 5 county school districts. Back in December, I went and spoke there, and there were vendors, different companies, teachers. There were principals, all the way down to the admins. And what I had explained was that um, we all have the answers people need, whatever your industry is. Okay, you have the answers that people need. You can impact 5 people or 5,000 people simply by understanding your purpose. And I found that for me, I'm impacting so many more people just by engaging with them in person, like we're doing here. So I'm a little bit more of the opinion that you can interact with people better if you're face to face or live. So, you know, if we can just understand that we can impact people, we can impact people. We get to pick how many people do you want to impact. Do you want to impact 5 people, 500, 5,000? but you have to have an understanding of your purpose and your passion. So that's what I'm going to answer about that. I would much rather be talking to a team of 5 people or 500. Um, when I spoke to this organization, there was over 300 people. I've spoken in meetings where there was 10 people. So it just for me is where my energy flows, where my passion goes.
Wow, that was powerful. I love that. And, one of the things that I see so much is people get so caught up on the number, right? Like, one of the things that I talk about is the only number that I care about is one. And the funny part with this whole thing that I've been doing this year of no 0 days is when you show up for yourself, there's always going to be at least one person in the room, right? Yourself. And I love everything that you shared about how it's really about the message, because that's something for me that I'm seeing kind of a lot of people are losing sight of that, right? Like, people are writing books now because they want to be bestsellers instead of getting their message and sharing their story with people. And even with speaking, right? Like, it's the vanity of it all that people want, not necessarily the impact piece. And what I'm really curious for you is, let's say, right, somebody wants to be a keynote speaker. What are three actionable tips that you could give somebody that would help them kind of, or let me rephrase, what are three things that you wish that you knew that you would have loved to have someone tell you when you were starting your journey to be a speaker?
Well, that's a good question, and I can answer that right quick because first and foremost, I'd never aspired to be a public speaker. I was petrified of people. I never talked. I mean, I lived in a home where you spoke when you were spoken to. And if you weren't spoken to, you didn't talk. And if you talked out of line, you got smacked in the face. Um, and, at school, my whole life at school, I didn't have a voice. I was bullied. I was always made to feel that I was less than. So I didn't aspire to be a speaker. I found that when I started speaking, I was sick to my stomach. I was sweating, and I stopped taking speaking engagements. So here's what I'm going to say. Three things. Number one, get help. I hired coaches. That's, I hired mentors. I read books. Number one, I learned. I learned. I read books. I hired people. Number two, I practiced. I remember one of my first presentations. I showed up. I think my brain stayed in the car. I forgot what I was talking about. I forgot what I was doing. I don't think I made any sense, but I got through it. I learned I had to practice. That's number two. And then number three, work on your confidence because it's a scary thing. And I'm going to tell you what I learned. I believe that there's a percentage of the fear of public speaking. What's that percentage? I mean, half of all people fear.
Probably like the 90, like high 90s. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it was like 90 plus percent.
Right. So here's what I learned, right? So you figure 90%, that's almost everybody in the room. And what I started doing was saying to myself before I got on any stage, most of the people in this audience are petrified of doing what I'm going to be doing. Okay. So when you have that confidence, knowing that just about everybody in the audience is going to be afraid of you. So they're going to be afraid of doing what you do. They don't want to do what you do. So it gave me confidence. Not that they're afraid of you, they're afraid of doing what you do. So that was one of the things that gave me confidence. I realized that most people are scared to death to do public speaking. And I have the privilege of being up here. I have the privilege of sharing my knowledge with you. So get help, practice, and be confident when you get onto that stage. Now, there's other things when I'm working with clients. There are other practical, technical tips that you can learn in order to make an effective presentation or make an effective speech. But those are the three things. Can't do it by yourself.
Yeah, that was powerful. I think about one of the things that you said that really stood out was one of my favorite documentaries that I watched on Netflix was it's this I don't know if it's still on because it was last year, but it's called The Playbook. And basically what it is it's like five of the most like elite coaches across different sports. And one of the coaches that they had on, her name is Joe Ellis. She was the U.S. women's national team soccer coach who won back-to-back World Cups. And she shared this quote that always kind of stuck with me. And she said that pressure is a privilege. And I've always been one of those people that has performed well under pressure. Like it's almost kind of like you thrive under pressure type of thing. And I was really thinking about it after hearing that. And I was like, oh, if you think about it, it is a privilege because there's billions of people in the world, but you're the one that gets the gift to perform and show people kind of who you are and how you can affect them. And the other thing that I took away from what you shared is it's been like one of my favorite quotes since I heard it a couple weeks ago, but it's from Jim Carrey, and it's the effect that we have on others is the most valuable currency that there is. I know for sure that you impact so many people because you do so much incredible work from being a professor, from speaking. I know before in previous conversations you had mentioned that you do stuff with like veterans, right? Like you're in all these different kind of avenues and arenas to make your impact known. And I'm kind of curious for you before we talk about your book, The Grid System. Why are you really on LinkedIn, right? Like, what are you looking to kind of achieve on LinkedIn, and how can myself and everyone else in the audience or who's watching on replay, how can we support you?
Oh, thanks. That's a great question. So let me backtrack a little bit. Yes, I work with veterans and first responders. That's my give back. Okay, so when I'm working with veterans, first responders, first of all, my son is a police officer. So my heart is with them and for them, our men and women in uniform. First responders are the salt of the earth. Our veterans, they have my utmost respect. And so when I'm working with different organizations, I'm speaking for free, I'm coaching for free, I may be even counseling for free. That's my passion, right? So there's no money exchanged, but helping people, serving, giving back. So I always want to preface when I'm telling people, hey, yes, you should be profiting from your passion. Absolutely. But we all have to give back. And that's in my book too. Investing in yourself and then turning around and investing in others. So, first and foremost, my hats off, my sincere gratitude, love, and respect for our men and women in uniform. Um, so, what I'm looking for on LinkedIn really is just connecting with people who are looking to up level or who are looking to get to the next level in their business, in their life, in their career. That's what really I'm doing on LinkedIn. I've gotten so many requests for coaching or counseling or speaking through LinkedIn, and I've been on LinkedIn for many, many years. Um, In fact, if somebody could help me, I have a LinkedIn account that I can't seem to delete. It's been since probably 2010 or 2008. I can't delete it. So if anybody's can help me with that, I would be forever grateful. It's an email that I no longer have. It was one of my first companies, and I no longer have that email or that website. So that's number one. If somebody can help me with that, and I think was that your question? Why am I on LinkedIn?
Yeah, and why people can support you. So if that's your only way that people can help you, I mean, I can tell you how to do that. You go to the settings option, and it will allow you under profile. You can let them know that there's a duplicate one. Um, if you don't have the email anymore, that you might have to reach out to LinkedIn help and they can help you that way. But in terms of that, that's basically kind of what you would do.
Yep, I did all that, and there's no response from LinkedIn.
Oh yeah. That
So
is,
it's I've been trying to delete this account probably for at least a year.
yeah, interesting.
So I was able to get into the password, and then it wants me to verify with my license, and it just was insane. But yeah, so that's really what I'm trying to do. I've had other people give me advice, and it just seems to not be working. That's it. I mean, yeah, as far as you know, writing a book, I'm offering a webinar on that. It is a complimentary free 1 hour webinar. It's an Eventbrite link that people can, if you want to pop that in there, that's coming out in February. Would love to have people who are beginners. Hey, I might want to write a book. Hey, I have a story in me. Hey, I've always thought about writing a book. What do I do to get started? It'll be practical tips, Q&A. So that's definitely something people want to hop into if they're interested in the idea of getting a book published. And then also, there's freebies on my website. I'm a big believer in positive affirmations. Listen, we have seen studies have shown that we speak how many words? How many words a day?
Thousand.
60,000, I think it
Yeah,
is.
I think it's like 30 or that might be the thoughts. I think it's like
Right.
30,000 thoughts or something.
It is. You're right. So upwards of 70,000 thoughts per day. Okay. That's
Mhm.
a lot of thinking. You have a choice. You can think negative or you can think positive. So I have learned over the years to focus on the positive. Look, I wanted to get back to something you said about parents. And the answer that I gave you, you felt was just so encouraging. And thank you for that. Look, it's always our parents' fault. Everything is our parents' fault. I'm sure my son thinks that everything that's going on in his life is my fault. We can say that, right? Our parents did the best they could with what they had. Okay. They did the best they could with what they had. Listen, so many people have had horrific childhoods. Mine, compared to some, was nothing, right? That doesn't get to dictate how we view life. It makes us stronger, and we can choose to be a victim or a victor. And that's one of the things that I have helped so many people with. Yes, I know it was a difficult childhood. I know that those terrible things happened to you. You had no control over that. But what we do have control over is what we do with it. Once you know, you have no excuse. Once you are made aware, once you have the knowledge, once you know, you have no excuse but to move forward. Or you can live in the past. And when you're living in the past, you have just stopped making room for your future. When you're living in your past, you have just stopped making room for your future. And Paul, so many people are so stuck in the past that they can't get on the track for their future. And that is, I hate to see that happen to people.
Yeah, it's so true, and the I love the quote that you shared. That was really powerful. Back in 2022, when I started my entrepreneur journey, I talked a lot about how I use my past to drive me forward instead of kind of holding me back. And I love what you said. That was beautiful. You wrote this incredible book called The Grid System, right? And I had mentioned earlier I'm writing my book this year. I I really have two questions for you. One, first question, selfish question. What are like two or three things that you wish that you knew before or that you learned from your journey of becoming an author that you had wished that you knew at the beginning? And then also, what was kind of, why did you decide to write a book, right? Because I believe you said earlier, like you really had no desire to do a lot of these things that you wanted to do, right? Like being a speaker, being an author, a lot of these things, it kind of just happened. So would love to know more about that journey. And yeah.
So one thing that I wish that I knew, well, I know now, but look, life's a journey. We learn. I mean, I learned some of the hard things, so now I can help other people get through the pitfalls. So I never want to discount what I've been through. I never look at it like, oh, that happened. I look at it like that happened. Now I can help others to not let that happen. So uh, make sure that make sure that you have a correct publishing company, and make sure you understand what self-publishing means, or traditional publishing, or publishing through a clearinghouse. That's what I wish I knew. I'm glad that I'm past all of that and it all worked out. So that's what I wish that I knew, but I'm okay with that. Why did I write a book? Well, I wrote a book because I was in so much pain when my husband died. I was young, I had nothing. Like I said, when we first started this conversation, I found solace in reading, okay, in poetry, in books. Um, and I just started writing. And if to me it was healing. But I didn't do anything with that book. We're talking many years ago I started writing this book. It was in my computer. In fact, I was with someone today. We had a meeting and I was sharing with her my journey. And what I had told her was my original book, I don't even know, because the computers are gone. I You're young, but back in the day, I mean, I wasn't typing on a typewriter, but I don't even know where that is. It's probably on something somewhere and in the trash heap. So I pretty much had to start from scratch. But my pain was my journey, and I knew that in order for me to make sense of what I was suffering, I had to put it on paper. I had to get it out. So it was cathartic. That's why I started writing the book. I wanted the book to be published because I believe we all have a story that can help someone else. And I knew that my story would help people. That was really all it was about. And I wrote it because there were people that I was counseling over the years and coaching who overcame a lot of odds. And those stories are in the book. So it's my story in the book, but it's also stories of people who overcame. So that's why I wanted to write the book. I lost both my parents during COVID. Bizarro. My mother passed away on November 19th, and my father passed away 5 weeks later on Christmas Day. The book hadn't been published. So here comes January 2022 is when I made a conscious decision. I've got to get this book published. It's been sitting. They always wanted to see it. They never got to see it. That would be something I would encourage people, whoever's listening, whoever you are, or whoever will listen to this. If you have something burning in your heart, don't wait till it's too late, because somebody that needs to hear your story may never get to hear it if you wait. That's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, wow, that was powerful. You know, that could be like mic drop a moment in and of itself. But I really resonated, Prof T, with what you shared about reading, because that was kind of a huge part for me as well. Like I started reading when I was, I think, in like kindergarten or something. Like reading was always just one of my things. I grew up old school with my grandparents, which is, this is kind of the funny story, right? Everybody's like, yeah, but you're like, in your 20s, but in many ways, like I grew up old school. The first computer that I had was like those really big monitors. Like I remember it when AOL was what people used for the email. Typewriters were used. Like we had one. The first phone that I had was like those dial ones. I didn't get a cell phone until like half of my life. So it's been interesting, and I just love having conversations, because while I experienced it, I don't think I was around when like that was like, the thing. Like for me, it was like we had that, but then we also had this newest thing that I had no idea about. I Last question that I want to ask you, what has been your favorite book that you've read? And what was kind of, either it could be like the biggest like aha that you've had from reading it, or what was just like a really powerful lesson that you've gotten that you implemented and has had a profound impact on your life?
Oh, that's such a good question. There's so many books because I've read so many books that were written by great authors. But my very first impactful book, The Little Engine That Could. Love that book. When I opened my private practice, that was proudly displayed on my desk because that is such a powerful story. The Little Engine That Could. And then, of course, for business, there's so many of them, but I think I'm going to have to go back to Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. That is where I learned how to focus, and that's where I learned how to make conscious decisions towards my success. So I would say those two right now, but I have like a list of Prof T's, 5 greatest books to read if you want to be successful in life. Um, People could reach out to me for that as well. So those are the two.
Yeah, that is so powerful. I was laughing because I saw LinkedIn's been interesting. We're not gonna complain about LinkedIn. We're gonna greet everything and everyone with love in our heart. But it's been interesting because I saw that Donna commented and she said she still has AOL or have or whatever. It's so funny. Donna, if you haven't, you definitely want to connect with Prof T. She Donna's I know she's like a writing coach, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, she also helps you like write your book, and she might even do some publishing. I could be a little off, but I'm sure you probably have people who it would be a good, collaboration because you're teaching people how to write, and maybe that might be something that you guys could do together. I want to say thank you so much, Prof T. It's so cool that we met at an audio event, and everybody knows like the LinkedIn audio events have kind of been my thing on LinkedIn. It's created pretty much my entire network. Everything of significance that either every person that I've met or done on LinkedIn has come through the LinkedIn audio events. But thank you so much for your time. I'm probably going to have to watch this on the replay so I can take notes. And you shared so much valuable insight. Thank you so much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure having you in my network. And before we go, I'm gonna hand you the mic for final thoughts, and you'll get the full screen.
Oh, thanks. So, first of all, Paul, I wanted to say thank you. This was so much fun. I was really excited about this. I love your energy. You're an excellent orator and great questions. And I also want to thank everybody that hopped in. I can't see everybody that's in. I'm not even sure, but whoever has hopped in, I just want to say thank you. Please reach out to me. I am listen, I give everybody my phone number. People reach out to me all over the place, and I'm like, hey, give me a call. Happy to talk. What I want to say is no matter what you've been through, we all have the ability to impact people's lives. We all have the ability to impact and make a difference. It's all about your perspective. So you can look at what you have been through as something like a boulder to crush you, or the boulder that you can climb on top and overcome anything. I am proof positive that you can go through stuff and still be able to live a great life. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that you were created to do and be and have everything you desire. You just have to put the work in. There's no easy way. It took me years. You have to put the work in. That's what the grid system is all about. It's all about a system. It's all about following the laws of the universe. It's all about following your passion, and it's all about following the path until the end. So, thanks, Paul. I could talk for hours, but I think we're good. I can't hear you.
I was muted. I always do that. I mute because I always want to make sure that I hear things because sometimes like there's either like feedback noise or I miss something. But we dropped it earlier, I think before the show started. She had mentioned that she has a webinar coming up in the end of February. The links are in the comments. I think it was like one of the first ones. If anybody's interested, sign up for that. If there's any questions that anybody has, either feel free to reach out to me or Prof T. We're both happy to help. And I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who showed up. You know, Angie, Gabe, Oliver, and Steven and Donna and everybody who I've been trying to stare at two things. So it's been interesting keeping up because for some reason all the comments haven't been coming through. But I want to say thank you so much to LinkedIn. You know, if it wasn't for LinkedIn, I don't get this opportunity. And it's been a wonderful conversation. The nice part is it's recorded, so you get to go back and rewind and watch take all your notes. But thank you so much to everybody who showed up and for you, Prof T. Amazing conversation, and yeah, we'll see you next time.